When you hear the word salesperson, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For a lot of us, it's that classic, maybe kind of pushy character from an old movie. But what if I told you that whole stereotype is basically a fossil? Let's dig into what this new, reborn salesperson actually looks like.
You know, you've probably heard of the play Death of a Salesman, right? It really cemented one specific image in our culture. Well, what we're talking about today is the exact opposite of that. We are not seeing a death, we're seeing a total rebirth. The entire role has been reinvented from the ground up.
And that, of course, leads to the big question. I mean, in a world where you can buy literally anything with a single click, where all the information you could ever want is right at your fingertips, do we even need salespeople anymore? It's a totally fair question, but trust me, the answer is going to surprise you. Let's just start with a number. 1 in 9. Any guesses what that is? That's the number of people in the United States who work in sales. And here's the really wild part. That ratio has stayed pretty much the same for years, even with the internet taking over everything. Selling is actually the second largest employment category in the entire US, and it isn't shrinking. So if the job isn't going away, then something else must be happening. It has to be changing.
All right, to really get what's happening here, we need to zoom out for a second and look at this huge shift that's happened in our economy. We went from an economy based on making stuff to one that's all about managing information.
And you can really see this when you put the old way side by side with the new. Back in the industrial economy, it was all about capital, natural resources, and the physical products you were making. But now, in the information economy that we live in today, the game has completely changed. So, here's the bottom line. The most important resource isn't a factory anymore, it's information. A business isn't defined just by what it sells, but by its relationships with customers. And being successful in sales, that's not just about hitting a number anymore, it's about adding real value. This completely rewrites the job description. So, with the entire economic landscape redrawn, you can bet the rulebook for selling had to be thrown out and written all over again. The old school tactics, they just don't fly anymore. The modern way of thinking is called value-added selling. And it's not about just communicating the value of a product, it's about actually creating value for the customer. That means giving them amazing advice, building trust, and putting together a solution that genuinely helps them. Think of it like a three-step evolution. First, you have to adopt the marketing concept, which just means you focus on the customer's needs, not your own product. Then you learn to really value that person-to-person connection. And when you do that, you transform from a product pusher into a true partner who's there to help solve problems. Okay, so the philosophy's different. But what about the actual career? What does it feel like? Let's bust another myth and take a look at the day-to-day reality and the rewards of modern selling. Right? If they're not just making cold calls and giving the same pitch over and over again, what are they really doing with all their time? This chart is probably not what you were expecting. The actual face-to-face selling, it's only about a quarter of the job. The huge majority of their time is spent on prep work, admin tasks, and customer service. All that crucial behind-the-scenes stuff that actually creates the added value we were just talking about. And the rewards? They totally reflect this new level of professionalism. The income is well above average for sure, but it's more than just money. There's what experts call psychic income, and that's just a fancy way of saying you get that awesome feeling of being recognized for your work and feeling secure in your career. On top of all that, you get a ton of freedom and chances to move up that are pretty rare in other jobs.
Okay, now this is the part that is really, really relevant for every single one of us, even if you never, ever plan on having sales in your job title. The skills of a modern salesperson, they've basically become essential for everyone.
Let's look at one last powerful number. 40%. That's how much of their time the average person at work spends persuading, influencing, and convincing other people, and this has nothing to do with actually making a purchase. The author Daniel Pink has a great name for this. He calls it non-sales selling. And to put that 40% in perspective for you, it means that for about 24 minutes of every hour you're at work, you're doing some form of selling. Think about that. So, who needs these skills? Pretty much every single knowledge worker out there. We're talking about managers selling their team on a new vision. We're talking about lawyers persuading a jury, entrepreneurs pitching investors, and customer service reps turning a bad situation into a good one. Selling has become a master skill for success. So the big takeaway here is this. Selling is no longer some niche job for a few people. It's a fundamental skill for all of us. It's about communicating, building relationships, and moving people to action. So the only question left to ask is, what are you selling today?